Welcome back. I'm Ryan Sturgis, pastor and biblical counselor. In this episode, I want to talk about bitterness. About bitterness. So let's jump right into it. How do we define bitterness, or how can bitterness be defined? Well, I define bitterness as an attitude of extended and intense anger and hostility. It's often accompanied by resentment and a desire to get even. It is a result of not forgiving an offender and letting the hurt and anger grow until the pain and resentment sour the person's view of life. It's important to understand that bitterness doesn't just affect the individual, it affects other people surrounding the individual. Where do I get that from? I get that from Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14 and 15, which says this. It warns us that bitterness is poison, and it says, strive for peace with everyone and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. Verse 15, see to it that no one fails to obtain the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springs up and causes trouble, and by it many become defiled. So bitterness, it affects the view and contaminates the individual. Let me just step back and say, if you're experiencing bitterness, you may have a reason to be hurt. But what I want to talk about is what to do with that hurt. The wrong thing to do with that hurt is allow it to grow and allow the offense to grow, causing bitterness in your heart. Because as we'll see here, bitterness contaminates the individual. It contaminates the individual. Have you ever tried to enjoy a food that's bitter? It might have different flavors in the food, but if it's bitter, it's hard to get through the bitterness in order to taste the food. And that's how it is with individuals consumed by bitterness. It doesn't matter what they experience, it could be the most joyous experience. But if they're bitter, it'll make the whole thing sour. It'll make their experience sour. And as their views are bitter, and they won't be able to enjoy anything of life. They won't be able to enjoy anything of life. It changes their view on everything. Um, for this person, I would say this the saying goes, for every silver lining, there's a cloud, right? So instead of saying for every cloud there's a silver lining, that person sees a cloud for every silver lining that comes. So for every positive thing they only see the negative, and in that way it contaminates the individual. But it also contaminates the people surrounding that individual, because if that individual is sour in all their experiences, what are they most likely to talk about with the people around them? Sour experiences. They're going to highlight the negative. And so even when someone comes with maybe positive news, what do you think they're going to hear? They're going to hear that cloud for that silver lining. Whatever the positive thing is, they're going to hear something negative um, about that situation. Have you ever heard the gossip of a bitter person? Have you ever heard the gossip of a bitter person? The whispers of a bitter gossip. It is going to be sowing seeds of doubt, sowing seeds of anger, sowing seeds of additional bitterness in other people, saying, well, you shouldn't be as happy as you are because dot dot dot. Oh, that's good news, but did you ever, so they're always going to be whispering bitter gossip to other people. Now, like I said, the only way you may have legitimate hurt, right? I may have legitimate hurt, but the only way to resolve that hurt and not allow it to become bitterness is by forgiving the person that hurt you. I completely understand that the challenges of forgiveness, especially when we've been hurt deeply, and um, you know it's just difficult. It's just difficult. But and we can talk about it some other time, but forgiveness is a command, and it's a command that we're given not just for the person that hurt us, but it's primarily for us. Why? So that we won't become bitter, so that we would release the offense and not allow it to sour our spirits. And so let's look at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31 through 32. It says this: let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. So we're called to forgive as God has forgiven us. We're going to experience hurt in this life, but the only way to prevent it from becoming bitterness is by forgiving. So I want to give you some important action steps for overcoming bitterness. Yes, forgiveness is important, and that's the primary aim of these action steps, but what are some practical action steps for you or for someone you may be counseling if they're dealing with bitterness? Number 1, accept reality of the hurt. Accept reality of the hurt. And what does that mean? It means that it happened. It's a reality and it hurt. Don't try to act like it didn't bother you or act like it's no big deal. It's important to acknowledge, hey, this thing hurt. This thing happened and it really hurt. It really hurt. So number 1, accept the reality of the hurt. You know, have the client or yourself, if you've been hurt by multiple people, make a list. Not to run around showing people this list. Please don't do that. But make a list of the people that that hurt you and the things that they did. Be very specific about what they did and how it made you feel. And so that's part of accepting the reality of the hurt. Also add to that list what you needed from the person. What is it that you needed? What was it? Respect? You needed respect and they didn't respect you, so now you feel hurt. Was it love and they didn't love you? Was it security? Was it protection? What is it that you needed from the individual that you didn't get that caused you to be disappointed, hurt, and then begin to guard that hurt and allow it to grow into bitterness? Be honest with yourself whether or not the person is able to provide for this need. Is it a person that you're looking to for protection, as maybe a spouse, for security, maybe it may be a parent. A lot of people deal with parenting their parent, needing to be the source of security for their parents because maybe their parents are struggling or has traditionally struggled with some sort of vice that they weren't able to be the source of security for their children, and that has carried on to adulthood. But let's be realistic. Can that parent provide you with what you need from them? And the answer very well may be no. And if that's true, then the last step in accepting the hurt or accepting the reality of the hurt, accepting your loss and grieving it. Now, it is a loss to have a parent who doesn't provide, or a spouse who is unfaithful, or a friend that betrays you. That's a loss, and you need to grieve that loss. You need to acknowledge that that person isn't able to provide what you needed from them, that it hurt, accept it and grieve it. Now, all of that is part of accepting the reality of the hurt. Number 2, the second action step for overcoming bitterness is to forgive. Now, again, that was the primary drive of all of this, but you need to be very intentional about forgiveness. And I want to define forgiveness and then give 4 promises that you make when you actually forgive. So let's define forgiveness as an act of the will, a decision not to think or talk about what someone has done. It is an active process involving a conscious choice in a deliberate course of action. It is the canceling of a debt that your spouse or friend or parent has incurred because of improper behavior or word. It's an act of the will. Forgiveness is an act of the will. Now, when we forgive, we make 4 promises. Here's what those 4 promises are. Number 1, we promise to not think about the incident. We promise not to think about the incident, not to be rehearsing the incident in our mind, not to be running it back or replaying it, causing re-injury to our heart. Number 2, we will not bring up the incident again or use it against the person. You can't bring it up. You can't slingshot it in the person's face every time you happen to be thinking about the incident or something comes up to remind you about the incident. You can't throw it back in the person's face. If we're going to forgive, we're not meditating on it, and we're not bringing it back up, throwing it in the person's face. Number 3, I will not talk to others about the incident. So I'm not going around saying, let me tell you what my wife did. Let me tell you what my friend did. I forgave him, but let me just tell you what they did. No, that's not what we're doing. We're not doing that. We're not thinking about it. We're not throwing it in the person's face. Number 3, we're not sharing it with other people. And lastly, number 4, I will not, the promise that you make when you forgive is that you will not allow that incident to stand between you and the person and affect your personal relationship any longer. So, have you forgiven the person? We can talk additionally about restoration and being reconciled when hurt has happened. But those are four primary promises that you're making. You're not rehearsing it, you're not throwing it in their face, you're not telling other people, and you're not allowing it to be a prohibiting factor in continuing in a relationship with that person. You've forgiven it as God has forgiven you. Okay. So the last action step that you need to take. So number one, just to recap, number one, accept the reality of the hurt, the reality of the hurt. Number two, you want to forgive. Number three, look elsewhere when it's appropriate. Okay, so we're not talking about a spouse looking elsewhere if a spouse isn't meeting certain needs, primarily needs for intimacy. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about needs of camaraderie, needs of, sometimes you need to go not to your primary person, but maybe you need, when it comes to like needs of talking about hurt, your deep emotional hurt, you don't want to go maybe to a friend that doesn't play that role in your life. You need to go to a professional counselor. You need to go to a pastor. You need to go to a friend maybe that sort of serves that purpose and only that purpose to hear your heart and work with you on that issue. Maybe it's appropriate to not, if you're a man, you may not want to pour all your concerns and frustrations on your wife's ear and lean on her shoulder every single night when you come home from work. You may need a buddy for that to talk about some of the challenges at work. So you wanna find a different place to have that need met if it isn't being met where you thought that it would be met. You don't want to just go with that need unmet. You need camaraderie, you need friendship, you need fellowship. Okay, so we can talk about churches and different, things in church where you may need to go to another church if you aren't getting the fellowship that you need at a particular church that you require for whatever reason. But it's very important that you don't go without that need being met because it is a need that we have is fellowship and support and camaraderie and encouragement. So you need that in your life. So those are just some primary thoughts about bitterness and some action steps that you can take and encourage others to take if they're experiencing bitterness. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend, and let's have some more soul care conversations.